Now that you know the basic structure of autonomic, we can start comparing the two divisions, the sympathetic and parasympathetic. So we're going to use green for parasympathetic, and we're going to use purple for sympathetic. That is consistent throughout your book, this color coding. So parasympathetic comes from the brainstem and the sacral region of the spine. So because of this, it is also called the craniosacral. And from the brainstem, you have 4 cranial nerves. So you can see here, these cranial nerves. So this is cranial nerves 3, 7, 9, and 10. We do that in the Roman numerals. There's the 4 cranial nerves that have parasympathetic function. Then down here, from the sacral, remember those nerves that come from the sacral region of the spine, they hang down through that cauda equina, and they come out here. And these are our pelvic splanchnic nerves. So for parasympathetic, you have from the brainstem 4 cranial nerves, and from the sacral region of the spine, pelvic splanchnic nerves. For sympathetic, it comes from all of this part of the spine. So this is the thoracic and lumbar. So because of that, it is also called the thoracolumbar. Here we can compare the upper and lower motor neurons. So here, the 2 lower motor neurons. Here is our parasympathetic, and here is our sympathetic. In parasympathetic, notice that the preganglionic neuron is long and unbranched. So here we have a long, unbranched preganglionic. In sympathetic, we have a short, branched preganglionic. In parasympathetic, because the ganglionic is so long, you end up with the ganglion in or near the effector. So you have 2 types of ganglion. You can have a terminal, is near the effector, or you can have an intramural, is inside the effector. For sympathetic, because the preganglionic axon is so short, your ganglion is going to be near the spine. So you can have a sympathetic trunk ganglion, which is going to be lateral to the spine, or you can have a prevertebral ganglion. which is anterior to the spine. So if we come back up to this picture, these dots that you see here are the sympathetic trunk ganglia. So for sympathetic, the preganglionic axon is right here, these little short brown stubs. It's very short. Then your postganglionic goes from there all the way out to the effector. So the postganglionic is long. In parasympathetic, you would have the preganglionic would be very long. Right? It might come from here, it might come all the way out. And then you would have just a very short postganglionic. Notice that in both of these, your postganglionic is unmyelinated. Sympathetic and parasympathetic also have different goals when it comes to stimulating the receptors. For parasympathetic, its goal when stimulating receptors is to have precise, local control. So it wants to just specifically pick out a particular receptor and stimulate that receptor, or effector, I should actually say. So the features that help with this are that you have that long, unbranching preganglionic axon. This way you deliver the signal directly to a particular effector. So, for example, parasympathetic stimulates your salivary glands and your lacrimal glands, which make tears. So it's possible to have tears without getting lots of saliva, or it's possible to have your mouth watering and getting extra saliva without crying about it, because you can have that precise local control. Parasympathetic is just the opposite. Sympathetic. The goal of sympathetic is mass activation. Sympathetic is what deals with emergencies. And when you have an emergency, you have kind of an all hands on deck situation. You want a huge response. You want all the effectors responding, and you want a full out response. So there are 3 different features we're going to look at to achieve this. So the first one is that short branched axon. So this short branched axon up here allows you to spread the signal out. And you get two things that happen as a result of having a short branched axon. You get convergence, which means one effector will end up receiving the signal from multiple neurons. So because all of these neurons are branching, you don't just have one neuron sending the signal to the effector. You end up with this repetitiveness of multiple neurons going to that effector. You also get divergence, which is where one neuron can branch to multiple effectors. So with all this branching and convergence and divergence, you end up with basically this web of axon stimulating effectors. So whereas the sympathetic is more, or I'm sorry, the parasympathetic is more just a straight line to a particular effector, sympathetic is more of a web to all of your effectors. The second feature is this picture. So if we get some context for our picture, here's the preganglionic axon. Here's our postganglionic axon. Notice what happens when we get to the effector. This is our effector. This doesn't look like the typical synaptic knobs that we're used to seeing. Instead, you have what's called varicosities. So the end of the axon, it branches, and you have all these knobs like this. But it branches into a web that covers the effector. So you have this web of knobs that covers the effector. So the effector is blanketed in synaptic knobs. Each one of these secretes neurotransmitter. So you're soaking the effector in neurotransmitter. Think of it like a typical synaptic knob squirts a little bit of neurotransmitter on one spot, and it would be like squirting someone with a water gun. You'd get one little spot on that person wet. A varicosity is like having a whole bucket of water and dumping on them. You can completely drench the person with the varicosity. The third way that we get mass activation is the adrenal medulla pathway. The adrenal medulla pathway is what gives you an adrenaline rush. So if we look closely at this picture, remember the brown and the blue for preganglionic and postganglionic. Notice here from the spine all the way through this path out here to the adrenal medulla is preganglionic. So this is this one long preganglionic axon. Now this is an exception to the rule. Up here we had said that sympathetic has short branched preganglionic axons. This one does not. So this is an exception to the rule. It is a very long preganglionic axon. Okay, then notice you don't see any blue here. There's no postganglionic axon. This is your adrenal medulla gland. Now, glands secrete hormones into the blood. This is a special type of gland. The adrenal medulla gland is a neuroendocrine gland. So endocrine refers to hormones, and hormones are secreted into blood. And neuro refers to nervous tissue, neurons. What you basically have here is the adrenal medulla gland is the postganglionic axon. So that's the neuro part. The endocrine part is that instead of secreting neurotransmitter onto an effector, it secretes it into your blood. So now you have neurotransmitter, adrenaline, in your blood. This is the adrenaline rush. And because the neurotransmitter is in your blood, it is transported throughout the body. So you are making sure to hit every effector. There's no hiding from the blood. So every effector is going to get this adrenaline. And stuff in the blood stays for several minutes, whereas a nerve signal is a fraction of a second. So not only do you have it in the blood transported throughout the body so that you get all effectors, it also is prolonged because it stays in the blood for several minutes. As opposed to a nerve signal that only lasts a fraction of a second. So think about if something startles you or you have like a close call, your heart starts pounding and it keeps pounding for several minutes, or you get really angry at someone and it takes you a while to calm down. This is why it takes a while to calm down, because your adrenal medulla gland is putting adrenaline into the blood and causing that sympathetic response throughout your body for several minutes. So there's a comparison of the way sympathetic and parasympathetic are structured and how their structure is different from each other.